coming election is by far the most important in living memory. I refer, of course, to the American election. It will determine whether we will continue to live in a world in which the dominant power is benevolent, presently the United States, which demonstrated her benevolence, her respect for law and human rights, by her actions at the end of the Second World War when she defeated Germany and Japan, or at least was the dominant force in the defeat of those powers. Rather than making financial or territorial demands, what did America do? She didn't lend them a lot of money so that they could restore their battered countries. She gave them vast sums of money to help them restore their countries. America was the successor to Britain. Britain, too, was a benevolent power. For example, she was persuaded by a small group of Christians that the slave trade from which she and the Americans had profited was inherently wrong. And eventually that was adopted by the Parliament. And they abolished the slave trade, and then they abolished slavery throughout the empire. And then the Royal Navy, the most powerful navy in the world, was commissioned to stop the slave trade across the Atlantic. A superb example of benevolence. The result of this election in the United States is that the benevolent power will be replaced by one which is a sinister power, a country which is cruel to its own citizens, which puts people into slave labor for the mere fact that they are Muslims, which tears down churches, which kills young, healthy Falun Gong practitioners, and gives their organs, their human organs, to a live, on-call human trade in organs, which breaches international law outrageously, for example, in relation to the annexation of territories and parts of the South China Sea in breach of international law, and which suppresses human rights in Hong Kong, the very territory it promised it would preserve them. That is the power which will dominate the world in which we will have to live. Australia's never known this. We've always lived in a world dominated by a benevolent power. And the rise of China will be assured if Joe Biden is elected president. For Joe Biden, when he was vice president, was part of an administration whose great function, whose mission was to manage the decline of the United States, no longer considered, as Americans traditionally did, as an exceptional power, based on the concept that man was endowed by his creator with certain unalienable rights, and among these are the rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Biden doesn't believe in that anymore, and that is because the Democrat Party, of which he is the candidate, has been captured by the far left. It is no longer the party of John Fitzgerald Kennedy, of Roosevelt, of Truman and other great American presidents. It is a party of the far left, and it is committed to the managed decline of America, which occurred under the Obama administration, turning a blind eye to the illegal activities of China, communist China, permitting China to take vast amounts of manufacturing and encouraging their departure under so-called concepts of free trade, turning a blind eye to the theft of intellectual property, disregarding the practices, human rights violations of the Beijing regime. That is the sort of thing which was happening under Obama. And it would be accelerated under a Biden presidency. First, the Biden family, for much of the 47 years in which Biden has been a politician, he's been one of those politicians who are career politicians. They go almost straight from the university into politics. They're not concerned with the interests of the country. They're more concerned with self-interest. It's very clear from the hard drive of a laptop which Hunter Biden abandoned in a repair shop. It's also clear from the work of Peter Schweitzer in 2 excellent books which have gone into this and which have not been challenged by the Biden family, and through corroboration by former business partners of Hunter Biden, that there was a Biden family enterprise, the purpose of which was to sell access and influence in Washington to foreign oligarchs, including those in communist China. The Biden family, Joe Biden, has never denied the veracity of the emails which are now in the hands of newspapers, particularly the New York Post, and which are being considered by a Senate committee. All he said is that there's some Russian smear, which of course is a fabrication. So we will have in power, if he is elected, a president who is already compromised by China and other foreign powers, and who is committed to a socialist policy which will ensure the decline of the United States, a faster decline of the United States than was occurring under the Obama administration. And this is because to get the nomination, he agreed with Bernie Sanders, the far left politician, that he would get the nomination in return for agreeing to a manifesto, which some are calling the Communist Manifesto, which will be a socialist manifesto, ignoring the right to life, anti-family. This manifesto will drag the United States down, as we have seen Nicaragua and Venezuela dragged down across the American continent. This is a terrible prospect, but it will ensure the rise of Beijing to world dominance, to take the place formerly occupied by Britain and then by the United States. We will live in a world in which vassal states will be regarded as owing respect and duty to the Chinese People's Republic, controlled by the Chinese Communist Party. And if we step out of line, as we are already seeing, we will be punished. It will be a cold and hard world, and very different from that world which was led by the United States. So what's the alternative to Joe Biden? It's President Trump. President Trump has had a very bad press. But for those of us who have been watching American affairs closely, he had a superb agenda when he finally got the American Republican nomination for the presidency under a very democratic and proper process, which allows both members of the Republican Party and supporters of the Republican Party to determine freely who the candidate should be. And he won in a very fair contest. He came out with an agenda which he referred to as Make America Great Again. And he has applied that agenda. In office, he has achieved extraordinary successes in achieving that agenda, much more than most other presidents, most other politicians. And he has achieved, for example, in relation to the Supreme Court, ensuring that the court is now dominated by real judges and not far-left politicians wearing black robes who use the Constitution, use their interpretation of the Constitution to impose all sorts of things which would never succeed electorally and which are not in the Constitution. President Trump has had a very bad press, and that is because a vast part of the mainstream press have abandoned the proper role of the press, and they have decided to become the propaganda arm of the Democratic Party, just as in the streets of America, in those parts of America where there's been rioting and bloodshed and fires and assaults, the BLM and Antifa have acted virtually as the military arms of the Democratic Party, which did not condemn what was happening in those cities under the control of the Democratic Party. It is a very sinister development, and it reflects a lot of what is happening in the Western world, where the far left, the old Communist Party, has decided that the best thing to do is to march through the institutions, beginning with education and moving on until you control a vast part of the country without the people realizing that. You will have heard a lot about polling going against the president. As you know, until the arrival in America of the virus from China, from Wuhan, which is called COVID-19, the preferred name of the Chinese Communist Party, which the WHO has adopted. That virus was spread across the world by the Chinese Communist Party closing down Wuhan, protecting parts of China as far as it could from the virus, but not telling the rest of the world that the people they were releasing, sending overseas from China, returning to their homes all over the world, who probably were infected without their knowing it. The Communist Party failed to tell the rest of the world what they were doing. And of course, this created a terrible mess across the world. That is being attended to as best we can. Until a vaccination is found, we have to somehow learn to live with that. The president reacted very strongly and firmly. As soon as he was aware of where the virus was coming from, he closed off travel from that part of China, and he also closed off travel from Europe, where the virus was also coming. And for that, he was much criticized. Now he's being criticized for the virus. Most of the excesses concerning the virus have occurred in Democrat-run cities, Democrat-run states, where there's been an obsession with the lockdown and where there's been enormous carelessness in relation to looking after the vulnerable. For example, in New York, Governor Cuomo ordered that those people infected with the virus, old people infected with the virus, were to be taken from the hospitals and be returned to the old people's homes. Well, of course, that spread the virus even more in the nursing homes because they were not equipped to do anything to try and fight and isolate the virus. And that led to large numbers of premature deaths in nursing homes in New York State. The point is that many of the polls you hear about, averaging of polls, are so ridiculous, so implausible, that they are obviously fake. Polls which say that Biden is 8 points ahead or even up to 15 points ahead of the president are ridiculous. You only have to look at the enthusiasm with which people are going to the meetings that the president is calling all over the country. The real polls, the polls which have a good record, which predicted the result in 2016, and there's only a handful of them, they are now indicating that the president is ahead nationally, that he is ahead in the battleground states, where the votes will be crucial in relation to the Electoral College. And, for example, in relation to the ethnic minorities, American, African American, Asian, and Hispanic, the president has doubled, according to Rasmussen, a very reliable source, the president has doubled or more than doubled his support in those groups. There is also what is referred to as the shy Trump voter. These are voters who refuse to reveal to the pollsters that they are going to vote for President Trump. And doing that is being done for a very sound reason. If you don't want your tires slashed, your windows broken, your house burnt down, your job taken away from you, you don't tell people that you're going to vote for President Trump, because the Democrats are unforgivable for those who are known to be Trump supporters. It's a very dangerous thing to do. But there is, I think, a reasonable amount of confidence, and I am certainly confident, that President Trump will no doubt win the election, and there will then be a vast amount of fraud. And the best antidote to fraud, I suspect, is the fact that there's now a very sound majority of real judges on the Supreme Court who will honor their oath to observe the Constitution. They will be the antidote to fraud. So we are in a dangerous situation. It's very bad for Australia if President Trump loses the election, but I don't think he will. I think we have a lot to look forward to, and a second term of Donald Trump will put strongly in place an American revival, an American economy with enormous strength, American armed forces growing and more powerful than ever, and a president who is very careful not to be involved in foreign wars. As we've already seen, peace is breaking out in the Middle East, and he has achieved much in his term. May he have a second term. It is certainly in the interests of Australia and the rest of the Western world that be achieved.